All right, my next guest is Terry Tucker, former NCAA basketball player, SWAT hostage negotiator, author of Sustainable Excellence, founder of Motivational Check, and a cancer survivor. Terry, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm very excited to hear your story and learn some insight from you. So, if you would, just kind of introduce yourself to everybody and we'll shoot from the hip.
Sounds good. Tim, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today. A little bit about me. I was born on the south side of Chicago. I am the oldest of three boys. You can't tell this from looking at me or from my voice, but I'm 6'8" tall and actually went to college on a basketball scholarship at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina, despite having three knee surgeries in high school. When I graduated from college, I moved home to find a job. I'm really going to date myself now, but this was long before the internet was available to help people find employment. Fortunately, I found that first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, in their marketing department. That was the good news. The bad news was I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mom care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. After Wendy's, I actually went to work for the hospital that cared for my father and my grandmother. And then at 37, I made a major pivot in my life and became a police officer. And part of what I did during my law enforcement career was I was a SWAT hostage negotiator. After that, I started a school security consulting business, coached girls' high school basketball. I lived in Texas, but for the last 12 years now, I've been battling a rare form of cancer. And then finally, my wife and I have been married for 31 years. We have one child, a daughter, who's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is an officer in the new branch of the military, the Space Force.
All right. What is she doing in the Space Force?
I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you. Honestly, I honestly can't tell you. I mean, she
Oh,
does not talk about it very much.
yeah.
She is. I all I know is she said, "Dad, just tell people I fly satellites, and we'll go with that." I'm like, so she flies satellites.
That's awesome. She's keeping us safe. I appreciate that. So kudos to her and thank you. Thank her for her service for us. I'm a veteran. I appreciate that. I wish I was smart enough to be in the Space Force, but that wasn't my jam. I drove trucks.
What branch?
I was in the Army. I spent 13 years in the Army National Guard. Most of the time was stateside. I was down in the Bay Area, spent a year working on the Golden Gate Bridge, protecting that and doing stateside security, got yanked off of that, sent over to Iraq for a year. So, yeah, I've dabbled in a lot of different stuff in the military, but not the Space Force.
Well, but thank you for your service as well.
Thank you. So 37 to become a police officer at 37, that's kind of on the older side of law enforcement. What made you want to get into that?
Yeah, so there's kind of a backstory. My dad's father, my paternal grandfather, was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954, and in 1933 was actually shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It was not a serious injury, was shot in the ankle. But my dad, who was an infant at the time, always remembered the stories growing up that his mom told, my grandmother told, of that knock on the door of Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us, your husband's been shot. So when I expressed an interest in sort of following in my grandfather's footsteps, my father was absolutely not. You're going to college, you're going to major in business, get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids and live happily ever after. But that's the life my father wanted me to lead. That's not the life that I felt I was supposed to lead. And Tim, I had a choice. I had a really big choice when I graduated from college. I could have said, "Hey, Dad, I know you're dying, but sorry, I'm going to go blaze my own trail, do my own thing, and become a cop." Or out of love and respect for you, I will do what you want me to do. So, understanding the backstory, my first two jobs were in business because that's what my father wanted me to do. And I sort of joke. I did what every good son did. I waited until my father passed away, and then I followed my own purpose, my own dream. And that's one of the things in my life that I am most proud of is that I never let that dream die. I never let that purpose die. I could have said, "Hey, I'm making good money as a hospital administrator. I'll just stay here." But I gave all that up to go down to the bottom of the barrel. I'm a rookie cop. I'm working the night shift and all that kind of stuff. And I did that because I really felt that's what I was supposed to do with my life.
I love it. Yeah, I was a reserve deputy for 10 years for a sheriff's department. And I kind of grew up in that, always wanted to be a cop, but it was very hard to get into law enforcement, at least on the West Coast back in the day. They were very, very picky about who they selected. And I guess I snuck in there a little bit later on in life when they were lowered their standards a little bit, you know.
I got that.
I loved it. It was quite the adventure helping people. But boy, what a hard job. My hat goes off to people who do that full time. It's such a burden on just those people and their families. And law enforcement is such a tough job. You are a SWAT negotiator. How'd that come about for you?
Well, SWAT is they're usually the best officers with the best training and the best equipment. And I've always wanted to be the best at whatever I did in my life. And so when there was an opening on the negotiating team, I mean, I was well into my 40s by this time. You had to do all the physical stuff, the running, the push-ups, the sit-ups. You had to meet with the psychologist, take psychological exams, meet with the command staff, and then meet with the team. And it was an all or nothing. I mean, if one person on the team said, hey, I've worked with Terry before, he's kind of difficult, I don't think this is a good match, you didn't get on. And I was lucky enough to get a thumbs up from everybody on the team. And it was just a tremendous experience. I mean, to learn how we communicate with each other, different questions to use, tactical empathy, being curious. I'd always been curious in my life. And that's a big thing about being a negotiator. They always teach you to be curious. And even the smile, which I always laughed at. They were like, okay, you're 2 blocks away, you're talking to this guy on the phone. Make sure when you start talking to him, you smile. I'm like, what? What do you mean smile? Like, I can't see him. He's 2 blocks away. It's like, no, it is so true that smiling, I mean, they teach that to people who do telemarketing and sales and things like that. Smile on the other end of the phone. If you and I were face to face, we have mirror neurons in our brain. If I smile at you, it will react in your mirror neurons, and there's a good chance without even realizing it, you'll smile at me. So just things like that, little things you'll learn to try to help people, let's be honest, probably having the worst day of their life, somehow get out of this problem successfully.
You stayed in law enforcement for quite a while. I saw you were a cancer survivor. Is that what kind of took you out of law enforcement, or did you just decide time for a change?
Actually, no, it was, I was married when I got into law enforcement. My wife had married me when I was a hospital administrator. And so it was her support, her care, and her love that said, yeah, I get it. I know you want to do this. I will support you in it. And she's always been the primary breadwinner in the family. And I was a police officer in Cincinnati, Ohio. And so she lost her job. And it was, I can't find another job in Cincinnati, was able to find one in Houston. And so we moved, and I got out of it. It was, she supported me in what I wanted to do. Now it was my turn to support her in what she needed to do for our family. So that's the reason I got out of it. But then, you sit back and you're like, okay, I've got an undergraduate degree. I've got a master's degree. I spent a couple of years of law school, and I've got all this police training, SWAT training. What can I do? How can I couple all that together and find some kind of a job or a business? And so school security was hot back then. I started a consulting business, worked with private independent schools around the United States to assess their physical security, write their policies and procedures, train their staff, and things like that, based on everything I'd accumulated from my time as a law enforcement officer.
Physical security is it's a very needed, unfortunately, space, especially for schools. I have one kid in school. He's 5 years old, and that's all I do is I walk around, and when I drop him off, I'm looking around, like looking at physical security for the location. So kudos to you. So how long you got out of that? Now you're doing something different?
So I was doing that, and it was great because I could, ramp it up or back it off as I was coaching girls' high school basketball. And, I mentioned our daughter, fortunately, or probably unfortunately, got my height and is 6'3", and actually went to the Air Force Academy. She was recruited to play basketball there. So I wanted to be able to coach her team. And so, during basketball season, I could kind of ramp the business down. And then in the summers and things like that, ramp it up. But that's also the time that I developed cancer. And I really have not worked in terms of, getting paid and things like
Yeah.
that since I did that. And that was a little over 12 years ago now.
So, kind of jumping into your diagnosis, I read, and I'd like you to kind of obviously explain it, but it started out on your foot, the bottom of your foot. Is that right?
Yeah, I had a callus break open on the bottom of my foot right below my third toe. And it was during basketball season. And so I didn't think much of it because as a coach, you're on your feet a lot. But after a few weeks of it not healing, I made an appointment and went to see a podiatrist, a foot doctor friend of mine. And he took an x-ray and he said, Terry, I think you have a cyst in there and I can cut it out. And he did. And he showed it to me. It was just a little gelatin sac with some white fat in it, no dark spots, no blood, nothing that gave either one of us concern. But fortunately or unfortunately, he sent it off to pathology to have it looked at. And then 2 weeks later, I get the call from him. And as I said, he was a friend of mine. And the more difficulty he was having explaining to me what was going on, the more frightened, the more afraid I was becoming. Until finally he just laid it out. He said, Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years and I have never seen the form of cancer you have. You have an incredibly rare form of melanoma. And most people think of melanoma as too much exposure to the sun. It affects the melon, the pigment in our skin. Mine has nothing to do with sun exposure. It's an incredibly rare form that appears either on the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands. Obviously, mine appeared on my foot. And so he recommended I go to MD Anderson Cancer Center and be treated for it. And I was. They excised the bottom of my foot, took out the tumor and all the lymph nodes in my groin. And then they said, you'll probably be dead in 2 years. We have nothing to offer you. And I thought, well, he gave me a death sentence. Maybe I could try to turn that death sentence into a life sentence.
So, I mean, you're obviously still alive, so you don't have a death sentence. We all have a death sentence. It's just how far it is,
Exactly.
how long we're on, Um, so what kind of treatments have you been doing to maintain your health?
Yeah, so initially my doctor put me on a drug called interferon, and I took a weekly interferon injection. And it was, as my doctor used to say, we're just trying to kick the can down the road. This isn't going to cure you. This isn't really going to do anything, but hopefully keep the disease from coming back. The side effects of the interferon were that I had severe flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after I took the injection. And I took those weekly injections for almost 5 years. So imagine having a terrible case of the flu every week for 5 years. This was not a cure. And eventually the drug became so toxic to my body that I ended up in the intensive care unit with a body temperature of 108 degrees, which is usually not compatible with being alive. But somehow I survived that. But obviously, I mean, with the toxicity, I couldn't take it anymore. And almost immediately after discontinuing the interferon, the cancer came back in the exact same spot on my foot where it had presented 5 years earlier. And so in 2018, I had my left foot amputated. 2019, 2 more surgeries as the cancer kind of worked its way up my leg into my shin. And then in the middle of the COVID pandemic, I found out my entire lower leg, I had a tumor large enough that it broke my leg. It fractured my tibia. My only recourse was to have my leg amputated above the knee. And I also found out I had tumors in my lungs. And I still have tumors in my lungs. I'm still treated every 3 weeks at the hospital for those tumors. So there's never been a period where I've been in remission. It's just been one thing after another for 12 years now.
There's so many people that are dealing with this, and there seems to be new medications that come out all the time. One of my buddies, he's a veteran, and I just interviewed him, and he had a brain tumor, and it's in his lymph nodes, in his lungs, and but they're doing like immunotherapy on him, and it seems to really be helping. It basically has stopped and shrunk a lot of the different growths that he has. So we are hopeful that as technology progresses, they're going to finally find some stuff to help cure people from this terrible disease. But
you're right. I mean, the things that they're coming out with now, I've been on a clinical trial drug, meaning it's not available to the general public at this point in time, for the last 4 years. And this drug does nothing to the cancer. But the way cancer proliferates in the body is it secretes an enzyme or a protein that hides it from your immune system. And what this drug does for me is goes in and wipes out that protein or that enzyme so that my own immune system, just like if we were to get a cold or a flu virus, your immune system says, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't belong here. We need to attack it. So it's really my own immune system that is keeping the tumors that I have in my lungs at bay. So it's much better having your own body do it than give you a bunch of chemicals that chemically try to treat the disease.
Yeah, 100%. So you're an author. You have a book, Sustainable Excellence. How'd that come about for you?
Yeah, never expected to write a book, never really wanted to write a book, but I have a very strong faith in God. There's kind of an old joke that says when we talk to God, it's called prayer. When God talks to us, it's called schizophrenia. So God has never spoken to me, and said, hey, Terry, write a book. But I think what God did, and this has happened to me at other times in my life, where he put enough people in my path that started making the same suggestion. Terry should write a book. Terry should write a book. And I'm old enough now, and I think maybe more mature, that I pay attention when those things happen. And so Sustainable Excellence, that's the name, Sustainable Excellence, 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life, was really born out of two conversations I had. One was with a former player that I had coached when I was coaching girls' high school basketball, who moved to the area in Colorado where my wife and I live with her fiance. And the four of us had dinner one night. And I remember saying to her after dinner that I was excited that she was living close and I could watch her find and live her purpose. And Tim, she got real quiet for a while. And then she looked at me and she said, well, Coach, what do you think my purpose is? I said, I have absolutely no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding the reason or the reasons you were put on the face of this earth. And there is a reason you're here, using your unique gifts and talents and living that reason. So that was one conversation. And then I had a young man reach out to me on social media, and he asked me what I thought were the most important things that he should learn, not to just be successful in his job or in business, but to be successful in life. And I didn't want to give him that, get up early, work hard, help. I didn't want to give him sort of the cliches that we already know. And so I spent some time taking some notes and eventually kind of had these 10 thoughts, these 10 ideas, these 10 principles. And then I stepped back after I sent them to him and said, all right, I got a life story that fits underneath that principle, or I know somebody whose life emulates this principle. So literally during the 4 to 5 months that I was healing after I had my leg amputated, I sat down at the computer every day and I built stories, and they're real stories about real people underneath each of the principles. And that's how Sustainable Excellence came to be.
That's amazing. It seems like so many people have a purpose in life. I feel like my purpose has always been to help men, actually, because there's so many guys out there who are struggling with mental health or addiction or just feel lost. And guys don't have an outlet, it doesn't seem. We're not able to talk to each other and express our emotions and our feelings. And, you, especially in the law enforcement side of things, those guys just bottle it up and keep it inside. There's a lot of men out there who are dealing with other mental health struggles and the psychedelics and mushrooms and this and that. They're MDMA. They're using all of these tools now for veterans and for law enforcement and guys to help deal with their mental health issues. I just know that you being you have a big personality. I've watched some of your videos, and you have such a passion for helping people. Guys out there who are struggling, what type of advice would you give to a guy who's, watching this video and they're like, I need help? What would kind of be your first direction?
I would tell you you're not alone. I mean, just like you said, there are a lot of people out there. You're not in an exclusive club. It's a big club. There are a lot of people that need help. And it really takes a lot of courage to get that help. One of the things I would suggest is find out what grounds you in your life. Find out what's foundational in your life. When we would do SWAT call-ups, we always debriefed afterwards, and then it was like, hey, let's go out to the bar. And I love these people. I would lay down my life for the men and women that I worked with on SWAT. But I never went out to the bar with them. because what was foundational for me or what mattered for me was my family. Going home and being around my wife and daughter, I didn't tell them a lot of what happened, but just being around people that I knew that cared about me, that loved me, that supported me, gave me an opportunity to kind of decompress and recharge those batteries. There are a lot of services out there for people, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's the military. Take advantage of those. You're not weak by taking advantage of those. You are actually strong by doing that. And I would venture to say that some people might see you taking advantage of that who may have not on their own taken advantage of those services, but see you do it and be like, you know what, I can do it. Well, if he can do it, I can do it too. And I'll tell you a quick story, true story, what happened to me when I get my infusion therapy. It's happened a couple of years ago, but there was a nurse, a young nurse. She was about 25, already a nurse, but learning how to do things on the unit where I was treated. And about 6 months later, she was taking care of me by herself. And Tim, she came in, she was like, Terry, I've got a story I want to tell you, but I don't know how to tell it to you. And I didn't know how to respond to that. And I said, well, I hope you decide you want to tell me. It sounds like I might enjoy it. So she's in and out, finally comes in, sits down. She said, all right, here's the story. She said, when I first met you, I was going to get out of nursing. I'd had a very good friend of mine die. I was in a really dark place. I talked to my family. I was going to quit nursing and I was going to go to work for Amazon. And she said, and then I met you. And I see how you react to your medication. I have a really bad reaction to it. She said, but you keep coming back. You keep showing up here. And I went back in your file and I read everything that you've been through. And she said, when I finished reading your story, I knew I was where I was supposed to be. Now, if she would have never told me that story, I would have had no idea that my life, just living my own life, had had such a positive impact on her. For all those people that are out there listening to us, you have no idea how your life is going to impact another human being. Go get the help you need, and you might bring a bunch of people right along with you.
Yeah, it's amazing. We don't really realize how much we affect other people and people around us. Even last night, we watched the Mike Tyson fight, and I met a guy for the first time. He's a veteran. He's a friend of my sister's boyfriend, and apparently he had shared one of my podcasts with this guy. So he's been struggling, going through mental health challenges. And it's just amazing to meet somebody and be like, this guy's listening to my story. And he told me, your story is actually help me. And I'd love to talk to you and everything. And so we are definitely changing lives, and men, men especially. I know women, they need help, but there's just not a lot of options for guys. So that's kind of the direction I'm going with things. So on your website, motivational check, what kind of information can people get out of that?
Yeah, every day I put up a thought for the day. And with that thought usually comes a question about how maybe you could implement that thought into your life. I have recommendations for books to read, videos to watch. You can reach out. And again, I will offer this. If there's somebody out there listening to us and you're having a tough day, I'm not a professional. I mean, I do have a lot of training in SWAT, in negotiating with people. So I might be able to listen and help, but I would certainly offer, reach out. Excuse me, I'd be happy to, have a cup of coffee with you if you're in the Denver area, or just pick up the phone and talk for a while, or listen. I mean, I can talk your ear off, but I'm also very good at listening to what's being said and also to what's not being said. That was one skill I think we developed as SWAT negotiators, was what's the big elephant in the room here that's not being said. And I think any relationship that we have in our lives, parent, child, husband, wife, boss, subordinate, is really overarched by trust. Do you trust this person? So find people in your life that you can trust.
Right on. So I kind of want to hear a little bit more, your story. We kind of jumped around a little bit. Do you have any stories from your time in law enforcement or being a hostage negotiator that maybe things went your way or things didn't go your way, and that kind of stuck with you and you've used that throughout your life?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple. I mean, it sounds like you and I went into, whether it's first responders or the military or things like that, because we wanted to serve. We wanted to make a difference. It wasn't, and I worked with a couple of these guys, where I'm just here to kick butt and take names and stuff like that. And sooner or later, somebody bigger, taller, stronger is going to kick your butt. And it's like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to make a difference. So I'll give you two stories. My partner and I, when we were running a beat in, Mark Carr in uniform, when we first got out of the academy, lousy year, a lot of dope, a lot of guns, a lot of violence. And we knew all the dope boys, but there was this one guy who kind of hung around with the dope boys, but really wasn't a dope boy. He was really kind of just somebody who grew up in the neighborhood with them. And his big thing was he drove without a license. And in Ohio, that's a misdemeanor of the first degree. And so we formulated this plan. One night we roll up on the corner, and of course, as soon as the cops show up, everybody disperses. We grab him, we handcuff him, we put him in the back of our car. We take him up back behind the tennis courts at the high school. And this is like 3:00 in the morning. And I'm sure he thought, oh my God, what's going to happen to me? We pulled him out, unhandcuffed him, and said, look, you're not in trouble, but we want to offer something to you. Said, you need $500 to reinstate your driver's license with the state of Ohio. We're willing to pay that for you. We also have somebody set up, because he didn't have his high school diploma or a GED, we have somebody that will help you get your GED. And we also have somebody, now it's on the other side of town, it's not here, that is willing to give you a job. If you keep hanging around with these guys, you're going to end up just like them, a convicted felon. We're giving you an opportunity to get out of this way of life. Tim, what do you think he said?
I bet he didn't do it.
Right. He didn't do it. The fact that he grew up with these guys, the fact that he grew up in this neighborhood, that was such a pull on him that he turned us down. And about 18 months later, he ended up being convicted of an armed robbery that he did with one of the dope boys. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. You can try to make people's lives better, but it's our own decision. We've got to decide whether we want this opportunity. And while I felt really bad about that, it's like, well, I'm really sorry that happened, but we gave you a choice. We gave you an opportunity out of it. So that was one story that I still remember the guy. Another story was a SWAT negotiation we had. This was a guy who wanted to take his own life. And this started around dinner time, and he ended up slitting his wrists. That didn't work. And then for some reason, he thought it would be a good idea to turn the gas on in his oven and stick his head in the oven like that was going to kill him. Well, that obviously didn't work either. And then he ends up calling a family member, and the family member calls the police. And so it's probably 3:00, 4:00 in the morning now, and I'm talking to him, and he's got a gun. And he finally says, Terry, I'm really tired. I just want to come out. I said, do that. I said, come out and I'll come down to the scene and we'll talk man to man. We'll talk face to face. He's like, I'd really like that. I said, but don't hang up the phone. Well, he hung up the phone, which is not uncommon. We're conditioned when a call is over to hang up the phone. About 30 seconds later, one of the tactical officers who had surrounded his house comes on the radio and says, I heard a gunshot. And I thought, oh my God, seriously? All this work, all this effort, and you shot yourself. He did shot himself in the head. But he shot himself, and I'm pretty sure it was a hesitation, like, I really don't want to do this. And he shot himself at an angle where the bullet went in underneath his skin by his temple, around his skull, and came out the other side, on the other side of the temple. Never penetrated his skull, never got to his brain. And, we always hear about when it's your time, there's nothing you can do about it. Well, this was a perfect example of when it's not your time, there's absolutely nothing you can do to make it your time, because this guy had it was a really bloody wound because it was a head wound, but in terms of severity, not a very severe wound at all. So he went to the hospital, got fixed up, and then got the mental health counseling that he needed to help him with his suicide. So those are two things that I still remember vividly.
Law enforcement, you deal with some pretty interesting situations all the time, and you never know what you're jumping into, man. I've got my fair share of stories. I'm going to give it a little bit more time. I actually left in December, so I'll give it a couple more years before I start. Too many stories, but man, this went by a lot faster than I thought it would. I love your story. You have a genuine heart and soul, and I can tell that you're really helping people and helping spread a positive message. If people wanted to get a hold of you and chat with you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, just go on to motivationalcheck.com, my website, and leave a message there. I'll get back to you as soon as I can.
Okay. Well, Terry, I sure appreciate your time. I know this was kind of a short one for me today, but we plowed right through everything that I've wanted to touch on with you. So I appreciate you being on and spreading the good word. Thank you very much.
Well, Tim, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you.